This ancient animal has survived everything nature could throw at it. It has survived the ice ages, the droughts, and even the ferocious onslaught of human beings. In the last century, the North American bison has been rounded up, captured, transported, and manipulated. But nothing has modified its wild nature. For nearly 80 years now, Canada has been working to preserve the bison. And today, an attempt is underway to re-establish it as a free animal once again. These animals are wood bison and have been raised in Elk Island National Park, Alberta. They are being rounded up for transfer into the care of an Indian band in northern Alberta.
We'll let these guys out with the main herd, and then Wednesday we should have lots of time because we got lots of time now. And all we have to do is worry about these guys. We can do the same way we were doing it last time.
Parks Canada Warden George Kukuski and Hal Reynolds of the Canadian Wildlife Service share responsibility for the roundup.
All you want now is that one big one. Yeah, we can cut him off for you.
Parks Canada have been involved in this program since the initial decision to save the wood bison was made back in the early 60s. And we in the Canadian Wildlife Service are responsible for transplanting them and establishing populations in the wild with an ultimate goal of removal from the endangered species list.
Every few years, 30 or so bison are chosen for delivery to other parts of the country. But it doesn't always work out as planned.
Hang it down like a person.
Yeah, come on.
No matter that they've been raised behind fences, these animals don't like to be penned, and their handling demands a special knowledge and care.
Come on. Come on. Come on.
You want him prod or not?
No, no problem. Here we go. Just peeved off as it is already. Next time he comes, just close the gate on him. In some cases, they just will not go in for you. There's no sense pressuring them. It just, if they're not going to go through chutes, get them out of the corrals and let them go back in the park. Close it. Close it. Right now, around the bend. When you get an animal that is jumping, it works really well if we put a blanket over their head and just calm them down, talk to them. And in most cases, it's usually a really excellent tool. All right, open that gate when I tell you to.
Gonna back him up?
Veterinarian Dr. Eric Broughton uses a small dose of a mild drug to reduce the animal's aggression and prevent them from injuring each other.
We're using a drug called Rompin. It's a very good tranquilizer. We're using about 100 to 150 milligrams on the big animals, and this is just enough to take the edge off them.
There are many problems in the release of free-ranging herds of wild bison. In particular, transplanted adult bison tend to wander, and they may do so in this case.
Personally, I would like to see some of the adult animals released. And if that doesn't work out, then we won't release any more of the adult animals and just we'll work with progeny. At which time, in 4 or 5 years, we'll have to then decide what to do with the initial transplant herd. It's all experimental at this point in time. We don't really have the answers.
The bison are loaded onto a specially designed truck. They are separated from each other by partitions pulled into place behind them. work must be carefully coordinated and expert timing is needed to avoid accidents.
There now, see? We can get the next one closed. And put 3 cows in there.
Yeah.
And then 4 cows in the back, 4 small ones.
That's they're big, eh? These guys, eh?
These guys are huge. They must be 1,800, 1,900 pounds a piece. Good. Perfect.
For the bison, this is just the latest journey in almost a century-long saga of manipulation by human beings. For decades now, they have been the subjects in a program of scientific management. It has all been done in their own interests, with the intention of saving them from extinction. For thousands of years, the bison, or buffalo as they are called, were free. The prairies were said to be, though they never really were, covered with bison, standing shoulder to shoulder as far as the eye could see. Their existence was threatened only with the arrival of the Europeans. Artists who had never seen bison let their imaginations run riot, creating almost mythological beasts. The first settlers never understood the real bison, a shy and placid animal that seemed to mystify them because of its great numbers and immense power. One thing was sure. They wanted the land the buffalo occupied. By the mid-1880s, only about 1,000 bison were left. Most of the survivors on the plains were held in small herds by private citizens.
Now you see how quick he moves on you? He won't go anywhere. But he...
Robert Shaw, a Montana rancher, is a modern-day example of those early enthusiasts who helped save the bison from extinction.
He just go back to Buffy. He kind of hangs with the other one. Buffy. His method of survival was all from the bottle. So he became more gentle, but he still has a mind of his own, don't think he doesn't. I just happened to be riding up this canyon, and here I come onto this baby calf that a cow had calved there, you know, a young cow, and she'd moved off and left this calf. So I was riding on, we went on, and then we turned around and came back, and we come down and went up and picked the little fella up. But he had never had any milk, see, when we got him. And so Marge there, she raised him on a bottle. And he's what you call extremely gentle. You seen how I walked right up to him there a minute ago.
Yeah, but he's still, you don't trust him too much.
Oh, no. The buffalo are entirely, that's why you don't see so many of these bison herds or buffalo, whatever you want to call them, because they are more difficult to handle. That's why everybody doesn't have them. And another thing, you've got to be a little bit situated for them. Your ranch situation. Now, they like these hills. Here, these like to go back in the hills. They like to go to the hills.
I have a small herd of buffalo. I've never sold one yet, so it's a dead loss economically, commercially, but I like to have them here.
This is Doug Allard of St. Ignatius, Montana.
My dad could care less about buffalo. I like buffalo. My Uncle Charlie liked buffalo. His dad liked buffalo. But all the people who owned buffalo at that time were like those people. And when they passed away, their buffalo herds were gone. Their little pasture where they had their 20 or 30 buffalo was used for milk cows, and they sold the buffalo. So I really believe that had this Allard Pablo herd not been in existence, I think the buffalo might have been extinct today.
The story of the revival of the bison in Canada begins in the hills of the Montana Territory with an Indian called Samuel Walking Coyote. In 1874, at the end of a hunt in the Milk River country near the Canadian border, he and his wife captured some young bison to take back to their home in the Flathead Valley. Although he couldn't have realized it at the time, he was to earn an honored place in the history of conservation.
Walking Coyote came here with the buffalo as kind of a peace offering. He was bringing him back to show that he could do something good because he had run off with another woman, wanted to come back here to his wife from here, and came back with the buffalo calves. I've heard all the way from 3 to 8. I believe there was probably maybe 5 buffalo calves that he had that were supposedly yearlings.
Walking Coyote laid out a blanket to familiarize the animals with the scent of humans. Then he and his wife set out with them on an extraordinary 250-mile trek across the prairies.
It took some perseverance and that on the part of that fellow when he was moving these buffalo. I don't think he moved them without some problems. I think he had some problems to it, but he did it, and it was kind of a fateful end for him. But I guess that's the way things operate.
What do you mean, a fateful?
Well, I mean him under the bridge, finding him dead after all of going through all the hardship of getting him here.
The Flathead Valley was a large reservation set aside for several tribes of Indians. Walking Coyote had access to the open range near the village of St. Ignatius, and he raised his bison there for 10 years. He was then approached with an offer to buy them by a local horse trader, Charles Allard, and his partner, Michel Pablo. Allard was of French-Canadian and Indian descent.
Dad, there's a man here who wants to sell these. These are bear, these are coyote teeth, and these are bobcat teeth.
Allard's great-grandson, Doug, today owns an Indian trading post at St. Ignatius.
Let's see. The story on Walking Coyote that I've heard all of my life is that very shortly after selling those buffalo to Allard, he was found dead under the Higgins Avenue Bridge in Missoula. I've heard other stories, but that's the one that my grandfather told me, and that's the one that I believe to be true. There was another story that I heard as a kid that said that he not only lost his money, but that my great-grandfather ended up with it a couple days later, too. Now, whether that story is true or not, I don't know. He was a very honest man, my great-grandfather, and I don't think he'd go down there and murder the guy and get his money back, but he might have won it in a card game or something like that, because my family did have a history of gambling a little bit in those days.
Which, of course, is dead now.
With everybody except me, I'm still a gambler.
As Indians, Pablo and Allard had the same right as Walking Coyote to run their herd on the reservation, and in the next 20 years, the bison prospered. When Allard died in 1896, they had 300 animals. But the range was being closed for homesteading, and Pablo needed a new home for his bison. He offered them to the American government, but Congress was indifferent. Perhaps because of his Mexican origins, Pablo felt personally slighted, and thereafter would not listen to any American offers. Pablo trusted his friend Alexander Ayotte, a Canadian immigration officer in Montana, and agreed to Ayotte's suggestion that he sell his herd to Canada. The Canadian National Park Superintendent, Howard Douglas, understood the importance of Pablo's herd, and he badgered the Interior Minister, Frank Oliver, into making a deal. Douglas traveled down to Missoula, where he deposited a $40,000 check. The bank manager told him American conservationists were furious and could have raised $500,000 to save the herd. But Pablo's mind was made up. It was now up to Pablo to round up the largest herd of the biggest wild animals on the continent. Leader of the roundup riders was the laconic Charles Allard, Jr., son of the herd's original owner.
Charlie Allard, Jr., that ran the roundup, was kind of a colorful character. He's kind of always been my idol in certain areas of life, and certain other areas I'd just soon stay away from him. He was the captain of the first football team at the University of Montana, for example, but there's no record of him ever having been a student. He just played football. There's also a story just prior to the Buffalo Roundup, when he was living in Missoula and playing football. In those days, they had quite a bit of money. The Allard family had quite a bit of money. He hired a railroad car, filled it with people from Missoula, came to the train station in Ravalli. There he got on the Allard stagecoach, which they had 2 of at that time, took all these people to a place in Flathead Lake called Wild Horse Island and had a week-long party. And there's still people from around Frenchtown and Missoula who tell me about hearing about that escapade.
But cowboys like Allard were the right men for the job, and all of their skills were called into play. The bison were scattered over the entire valley. They were stronger and faster than even the best horses, and could usually outrun them on the flat. They looked ungainly and awkward, but appearances were deceptive. Day after day, the cowboys rode from dawn to dusk. Dozens of their horses collapsed from exhaustion under them, or were killed in encounters with charging buffalo. But slowly they herded the huge animals together and edged them down towards the railhead. In the last 30 miles, they had to be shepherded along a narrow road that wound through the hills. It took a whole month to round up 200 of the most docile animals in the herd. Howard Douglas arrived from Calgary to oversee the loading and installed himself in the Ravalli Hotel beside the railway line. He carefully checked the strength of the corrals and rail cars. He asked that several rail cars be reinforced, and the company, Great Northern, complied. Now came the business of loading the buffalo into the train. Witnesses told of terrified animals repeatedly charging the corral fences, hooking their horns between the bars and ripping holes in them. They had to be cut individually into a loading chute where a rope was slipped over their horns. On the other side of the car, gangs of men snubbed the rope on a pole and laboriously hauled the animal up into the rail car. This great bull charged right through the rail car walls, but died in his effort to regain his freedom. The animals fought so hard that only 16 were loaded on the first day. The cowboys began to wonder if the job would take all summer, yet within a week, the task was done, and the train carrying the first part of the last great bison herd in the world set off on the 52-hour journey to Alberta. By now, the buffalo were evoking a warm curiosity and sympathy. People came from the neighboring villages to Lamont near Edmonton and made an occasion of it. Men in their bowlers, Homburgs, and Panamas, women in their Sunday best. About 1,000 turned up to watch the unloading. A new Buffalo National Park was being prepared, but the animals were temporarily put into nearby Elk Island Park. Back in Montana, an operation that everyone thought would take 1 year now stretched into a 3rd, 4th, and 5th year as the buffalo fought to remain free. In 1909, it was decided to bring them in one by one in individual crates. In all, between 1907 and 1912, the Canadian government took delivery of 716 bison at a cost of almost $200,000, equivalent to several millions today. Pablo invested heavily in fences, corrals, and bridges. It's doubtful if he made much profit, but he was as good as his word. He had personally organized a roundup of wild animals such as history had never before known. In a famous painting, Charles M. Russell, the Western artist, who had himself taken part in the roundup, recorded it for posterity. To receive the buffalo, the Canadian government set aside 200 square miles of Alberta prairie near Wainwright. It was thought to be ideal habitat, capable of sustaining at least 5,000 buffalo, enough for the foreseeable future. But the buffalo did far better than expected. They now showed how they had become the dominant animal on the continent. By the end of the First World War, there were already 8,000 buffalo in the park. Bud Cotton is a living part of the history of the Wainwright Park. He joined the park staff in 1913 and became head rider. He is now in his 90s. And the basement of his home in Calgary today is like a small buffalo museum.
I have an envelope here full of pictures which I've collected over the years. Buffaloes and different other animals. And we had handled over 28,000 altogether on our main herd.
Bud's photographs are a testament to his life's work with the buffalo. Today, those memories are strong.
I make these animals up like a couple one of yours. Will be a 4-horse rig for the outfit when I get it done. And also I have a buffalo here. I have quite a demand for these different kinds of animals, deer and elk and so forth. I have this other one here with the elk. It's just cut in, but I haven't got it colored yet. I'm getting up in years there now, and I get my old bumps and bruises I've received. I think they're kind of climax coming along, kind of crippling me up. And the one arm is bad with arthritis. It's an old age complaint anyway. But otherwise, I guess I'm pretty lucky to be able to travel around and enjoy myself in this work.
But even so, you won the first prize at the Calgary Stampede this year?
This year, yeah.
At the age of 93?
Yeah.
Not too bad.
Yeah. No, I was lucky.
By the 1920s, Canada's Wainwright buffalo herd was world famous, an attraction for tourists from many countries. And Bud, on his horse, was there to lead them through the gates.
Mr. Cotton, when you first got the job at the Buffalo Park, how did the buffalo strike you?
Well, they were running practically wild there, just turned loose, and, except this bunch they put a bunch into what they call a visitor's park.
Were they hard to handle?
Yes. It was hard. They were faster on our horses, and like a bunch of cattle, we'd have 3,000 or 4,000 head, just herd them night and day. But the damned old buffaloes, of course, they were fenced in, was one good thing. And once you wanted to gather them for the corral, they didn't know what a damn gate was to start with. So we'd pick up about 1,000 head and start off with about 2,000 head on the run. They just started on the run, the whole works.
Do you remember the movie, the Hollywood movie that they made?
Yeah.
Can you remember anything about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was in charge of they put me in charge of the outfits to represent the park and to watch out what they were doing, you see. You know, they were good.
Did you get 4,000 buffalo on the dead run for the
Yeah. I had lots of riders, you see, so we circled the park way back. But once they got them more or less over within a mile of the pictures to go in the right direction, with our riders, we had to get out of there. You know, they was firing right into us.
Hollywood sent movie crews to the park at least 3 times. For a few years, it seemed Wainwright became the last remaining home of the old Wild West. It was a dangerous business to confront 4,000 charging buffalo and required a cameraman with real nerve. The National Parks cameraman, W.J. Oliver, had more courage than most. He was the only one willing to film from a pit in the very path of the charging herd.
What do you think? He said they could dig a pit for me? Sure. So we dug a pit down about 5 foot deep, I guess it was, put the planks on it, and then right on a buffalo trail, and the buffaloes would follow a trail to kick them loose. Luckily we did, because when this cow came through on the dead run, she shoved her darn foot in there.
Not only did the buffalo hoof smash Oliver's camera, but it injured his shoulder, and he was lucky he wasn't killed. These great numbers of animals were certainly useful for making movies, but they were now a problem for the park. This was an era before concepts such as carrying capacity were properly understood, but it had become obvious that the bison were eating themselves out of house and home. This could not go on. The herd would have to be moved elsewhere, or reduced in size through a program of controlled killing. A man called Sam Purchell, a deadly shot, was hired to cull the herd. In the next 20 years is said to have shot 28,000 bison.
In 1921, our herd was too large. Ottawa would send us a list every year. So many aged bulls, dry cows, yearlings, and so on. And
you must have, how many did you kill yourself?
I don't know, I must have killed up in the hundreds anyway. Mm-hmm. And same with Blake, because the elk, I forget the number of elk we had. There's a big herd of them. And
was there a public reaction to the killings?
Oh, yes. And to make things worse, the Thomas Inns people, they'd done the dirty trick on them. They finally got this big herd running. And maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but they had a picture came out in the Edmonton Journal. He was a bull laying down with about 6 arrows sticking him. 2 Indies shaking hands over would say, wow. His reaction to that.
That was earlier, right?
That was the Inns people. Well, even then, after we started shooting them down, the people, they thought it was a damn shame. They didn't realize that they had to be disposed of, and they were getting the hides. But they figured it was massacring the last buffaloes.
There were certainly more bison than the range could carry, or more animals of all kinds, because there were yak and various members of the deer family, all using the same range and all exchanging parasites and diseases. And it had been known since at least 1921 that there was a high incidence of tuberculosis in the herd.
Professor W.A. Fuller of the University of Alberta.
Some extreme cases and large number of marginal cases of TB.
In spite of the diseases and the opposition of scientists, the government decided once again to pack up the herd and move it, this time to the Wood Buffalo Park 800 miles north.
They largely ignored the scientific advice and went ahead with the transplant anyway. A justification that I've seen in print, a rebuttal to the arguments put forth, was that the tuberculosis was a disease that had been acquired by close herding and maintenance in corrals and close contact, and that it would disappear once the animals were released in this big range and could spread out, wouldn't be transmitted from animal to animal. In the event, of course, that turned out to be wrong.
The Wainwright animals were pure plains bison, and many experts also opposed the move because of their fear that these animals would interbreed with the wood bison that had always been in the northern park. So, Bud Cotton and his riders began yet another roundup. The animals were put on a train to Fort McMurray, where they were placed in holding pens. This was a huge operation, involving 9 times as many animals as the original Pablo Allard roundup.
There's only 2 animals killed in all that bunch we shipped up there. It was 200 shipments every week. 6,700 and some odd.
Well, there were some local politics involved. The contract to move the bison was awarded to a company owned by Peace River Jim Cornwall, who was a firm supporter of the government and had actually raised a regiment of soldiers at the time of the First World War. And presumably the 4 years of this contract saved him from bankruptcy.
When the last of the bison ran off into the forest in 1927, they headed almost 100 miles south into the Peace River Delta. To accommodate them, the government extended the park to 17,000 square miles, making it the biggest area of protected land in the world. Of course, as the scientists had foreseen, they did interbreed with the wood bison, giving rise to a hybrid animal. Canada's great experiment now took a rather bizarre turn. The population did indeed increase. Disease remained a problem, and the biggest free-ranging herd in the world was now neither one thing nor the other, biologically speaking. Once again, a program of selective slaughter was carried out. This time, the purpose of the slaughter was to provide meat for native people. In the 1960s, they had to kill some animals for a more urgent reason, to save the herd from an outbreak of anthrax. Anthrax is a spore that becomes established in the soil. It can remain active for decades. Animals can pick it up through simply eating or drinking. An infected animal almost surely dies within a week. In an effort to deal with the anthrax, the herd was again rounded up for inoculation. This time, not by friendly cowboys, but by roaring helicopters. These corrals were built on an enormous scale and at high cost. They had to be, because it was estimated that there could be up to 12,000 bison in the park. Yet it became apparent that in any one year, no more than 4,000 animals could be processed, and they could never be sure of reaching all affected animals. The inoculation program was never proven to be effective. The roundups, however, were certainly damaging to the bison. Young were trampled to death, legs broken and flanks gored. Then came a new problem, capture myopathy, death from shock. Many animals lost control of their movements, sank to the ground, and either were never able to rise again or simply withered away to die within a few days. Finally, it was realized that the new methods of scientific management had overlooked the essential nature of a wild animal. The roundups were discontinued. Almost 100 years of manipulation had certainly saved the bison from extinction, but at what biologists considered to be a high cost. Dr. Nick Nowakowski of the Canadian Wildlife Service.
There's this new form, which biologists don't like to talk about very much because it was an error in judgment, and that is to bring plains bison from Wainwright, an overcrowded Buffalo National Park, to the area of Wood Buffalo National Park, where they hybridized with the wood bison under the circumstances, and we have a hybrid form. Strangely, that was the only population that was free roaming in Canada. So if we were to be living a bison legend, we were using the wrong actors for it.
In the late 50s, Dr. Nowakowski discovered a small herd of wood bison in the north of the park that had apparently never been in contact with the Wainwright animals. 77 of these animals were rounded up, 20 died of capture myopathy, but 18, found to be free from disease, were taken to a remote area north of Great Slave Lake and released into the wild. Within 20 years, these 18 animals increased to more than 1,000.
To safeguard what was a very, very small population of wood bison when we first began the operation, it was necessary to spread them far and wide under some form of security. So the second movement in 1965 was Elk Island, which is a fenced national park.
Elk Island National Park already had plains bison. Now, a small herd of wood bison were moved into an isolated area of the park south of Highway 16. In the modern era, it is obvious that the glory days of the bison are over. Great herds of wild bison cannot coexist with the millions of people who now inhabit Western Canada. Herds in future are likely to be small. In fact, the wood bison that are now under scientific management at Elk Island have been designated as endangered and have come under intensive study. The first problem has been to determine whether they really are different from the plains bison, whether they constitute a genuine subspecies. To the casual view, the most notable difference is the size. The wood bison is taller, narrower, and in general 20% larger than the plains bison. The main characteristics of the plains bison are its low-slung hindquarters, its clearly marked cape, heavy chaps behind the front legs, a long beard, and a low hump. The head is quite close to the body, the neck short. By contrast, the wood bison has a tall, narrow hump, high, square hindquarters, a short beard, if any, and its cape is not usually so clearly marked. There has been a big increase in recent years in scientific study of bison. Many museums and universities are interested in the animal, as illustrated in this diorama in Ottawa. Hundreds of researchers in many countries have been busy digging up ancient skulls. In Ottawa alone, there are now warehouses full of old bones, and they have been used by the Museum of Natural Sciences in a 5-year study to determine the difference between wood and plains bison.
Now, these two skulls show some of the differences that came out of our morphometric analysis, and which seem to be the distinctions between plains and wood bison. First of all, if one looks at the horns, you can see that the wood bison has longer, more developed horns. The second part of the skull is the rostrum, which tends to be wider, the nasals, the rostrum, in the plains bison than in the wood bison. As we found that we could discriminate between plains bison skulls and wood bison skulls on the basis
Dr. Stanley Van Zyl de Jong.
We attempted to reconstruct the historical range of the two forms. All bison populations from the Canadian Rockies and the American Rockies or areas west are closely related to plains bison. The wood bison, on the other hand, the core distribution, historical distribution, is in this area.
So it seems likely that the wood bison were a distinct subspecies which didn't intermingle over a very long period with the others.
It definitely seems to have been a subspecies that was quite distinct, which implies isolation. But whether it was totally isolated is doubtful. There must have been, I mean, they are the same species. There's little doubt about that.
There is still disagreement and controversy among the experts about the prehistory of the bison. But it appears that at one time there were bison across the entire northern hemisphere, including Europe. They emigrated to North America from Siberia between ice ages. Here they have lived through many adaptations, sometimes developing long horns and large bodies, at other times shrinking in size, until they took their present form about 4,000 years ago.
These are racked specimens of steppe bison. You'll see that they have the characteristic very long horn cores. Some of them are unusually well preserved, and they have the horn sheaths.
At the Paleontology Warehouse in Ottawa, Dr. Richard Harrington.
These are from the Yukon Territory. A lot of them are from the Dawson area, and they're about 20 to 30,000 years old, I would estimate. Here you can see one of the horn sheaths belonging to a male of Bison crassicornis, or the steppe bison. But in the permafrost, they're often remarkably well preserved, and I'll just show you how these slip on. It adds about a third more to the total length. And some people consider them, just because they're of Ice Age vintage, to be giants. In fact, they're not. The skeletons themselves of these particular animals are not much larger than the modern wood bison, for example. This is a male, this is a male, this is the steppe bison, this is the modern bison. These are the horn cores, and you can see that vast difference in the length of them.
Researchers have spent endless hours crouched in fields noting every detail of bison behavior. And dozens of treatises have been published by competing experts, especially about their sexual habits. In Elk Island in August, after months away by themselves, the wood bison bulls come out of their seclusion and begin to exhibit aggressive and restless behavior. The rutting season is at hand. A bison herd is a tightly organized social group, dominated by the senior bulls, who, at the time of rutting, enter into intense competition for the cows. Once a bull is in a high state of aggression and excitement, he is usually looking for a fight. He will wander the herd, challenging other bulls to establish his dominance. When fights do occur, they can be as short as a few seconds or as long as a few minutes. These animals weigh up to a ton, and their battles are vicious affairs. The object is to get the head under the opponent's head, throw it off balance, and expose the flanks to a quick and lethal thrust of the horns, inflicting plenty of scars among the males. The bull's prize for such a victory is the cow of his choice, if she's interested. Sometimes a bull may stand by a cow's side for 10 days, swinging across in front of her to protect her from the attention of other males whenever she tries to move away. Many people travel to Elk Island National Park at this time of year to observe bison behavior. Among those is Mrs. Alice French, a bison aficionado.
I can drive right into a fairly large herd that will be starting their day, so to speak. And they tend to bed for the night along the road, because I think the grass, the grazing in that area is probably very appealing to them, and they settle down for the night. I feel that they grow on you. They're a very interesting animal. They project a certain amount of calm, and I really like them very much. I'm very fond.
Mrs. French developed her interest in bison through her husband, Vern. He was born in Ontario and was obsessed with the animal from childhood. In the last years of his life, he moved to Edmonton, especially so that he could be close to bison. He became a leading advocate of the program for extending bison herds.
At one stage, he mentioned that he would like to be buried here, and it would created a bit of a stir among the family. We considered it kind of humorous and kidded him a little bit about that. But when he passed away, there was just no doubt that this was the logical thing to do, put his ashes into this park. Very happy about that decision. It's certainly been a comfort to me to feel that we've done just what he would have liked us to do.
So he thought we should have more bison rather than
Oh,
fewer.
absolutely. Oh, I think if Vern had his way, he'd remove the people and just take people out of Alberta and put bison in, most definitely.
Since the time of Michel Pablo, there have been businessmen across the continent who have both preserved the plains bison and exploited its commercial potential.
Clarkson bought the cow, $43. Clarkson, $43.
Alberta cattleman Bill Nielsen is one of these entrepreneurs.
9 feet on it. 47 go here. Right here, 47 here, 7 1/4. $47 here, sir. 7 1/4, 7 1/4, 47 1/4, sir. 7 here, 7 1/4. What do you say? 7 1/2, 7 1/2, 75, 75, 47, 75. Wait here, 48. Brian, 48. 47, 75, 48. No 8, sir. 48.
They call me Buffalo Bill. I guess that's and I don't mind it.
47, 75, 48, sir. Watching here, some good cows over the North Country. 47 go here. 47 here, 7 1/4. $47.
Because I'm in the cattle business, that's where I really mainly make my living, and it always has been, and I really appreciate the cattle business. But when it comes down to ranching, that in our country, in our area where there's lots of snow and where you've got to put up a lot of feed and do a lot of work to look after cattle, the buffalo was so simple that long as you have fences to hold them and there's grass underneath the snow or like winter pasturing, you never have to feed them, you never have to water them or anything like that. And in this country where it gets lots of days 30, 40 below, the buffalo just thrive on that. They just out in the middle of the fields and jump and play and have a good time, where your cattle are in the barns backed up with behind the sheds and humped over and cold and pretty hard on them, see. I've had awful good luck working with them. They've been they're good to me. They make me money. To me, they got more brains than all the rest of the animals put together. You can just about talk to them.
For many decades, ranchers have used bison in cross-breeding experiments with domestic cattle.
And what's her mix?
She's beefalo and beefalo. She's real
from
cross.
From a beefalo cow and from a beefalo bull. Because usually when you start up breeding beefalo, you should start out with a 3 crossway bred cow. You get not too much beefalo in there, so that's why you get better breeding results then.
Ziggy Bewald is Bill Nielsen's partner in his bison operation and an expert on buffalo meats.
Well, he's a chef, and he got attached to this buffalo 3-4 years ago before I met him. And I really don't know how he got just figuring out that he wanted to get into it. But when I run into him, he was already selling buffalo meat, like on a small basis. And I got visiting with him, and he knew all about the buffalo meat and how to cook it. And by being a chef like that, he'd experimented with it a little bit. And so I was looking for somebody to help me, see.
What about the commercial future for beefalo as opposed to buffalo, Ziggy?
I would say there is no future market price-wise for the food industry or a special market for it, because if you put it on the table, it is not much different. Just on the meat is a little more marbled than beef, but taste-wise, it's just about the same.
So you think the market is really going to be in the wild meats area?
Yeah, I would say in the wild meat area we get a good market coming, and people are looking for something different there.
The Canadian government conducted breeding experiments for nearly 50 years, beginning in 1916 in Alberta. Hundreds of animals were produced, given names like catalo, beefalo, and even yakalo. As the cross-breeding proceeded, the animals began to look more and more like ordinary cattle. The major problem was 100% sterility among crossbred bulls. The experiments were abandoned by the government in 1964. The truck that left Elk Island National Park with 18 wild wood bison has traveled all night on the 800-mile journey to Hazama Indian Reserve in northern Alberta, where eventually a herd will be released into the wilderness. This is part of a program established under international conventions for saving endangered animals. A 6 a.m. arrival. Everything has gone well. After the hard night's work, the crew are quite tired, but there's a reception committee eagerly awaiting the animals. The bison have been checked repeatedly during the night, and the veterinarian, Dr. Broughton, now encourages them to leave the truck. These animals were raised at Elk Island with the intention of eventual release into the wilderness. Such releases don't always work. At least once before, a released herd wandered onto the plains and had to be rounded up and sent back to the park.
He's the one to watch, okay? He's the one that came after Hal and I on the roundup. And he was the one that was in the back end. You can tell him by that funny hunk of hair on his nose. Be careful of him. I wouldn't trust him at all, and I wouldn't go unless I had a truck on that.
That last batch were just young ones?
Those are young ones. You had 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds in that batch.
The Indian people in this area have not seen wild bison for many, many years. And for them, the reintroduction has a special significance.
John,
Kendersi. It did it is on the Nagadot. Click tender dig came till only within a 2 hours. It did it. Then you don't see the sinkhole.
I am very happy that the buffalo are released today. He says it seems that the natural habitat, the wildlife around the area are slowly decreasing, and hopefully he says that the buffalo will breed and increase in numbers in our country.
This group that we moved in here today, we call it the transfer herd, will likely be here for several years, and the idea is to release the offspring of this transfer herd. Previous attempts at transplants of many species have shown that very often with older animals in particular, they tend to, well, they have a homing instinct. They tend to go home.
Gary Lynch of the Alberta Wildlife Service, one of the cooperating agencies.
With animals that are born here or very young animals, the probability is that they'll stay right in the area. This transfer herd may never be released. It may end up going back to the park, but we'll establish the free-ranging herd from the offspring of these animals.
So far, one wood bison herd has been reestablished in the wild north of Great Slave Lake. But the wood bison will be defined as an endangered animal until at least 3 herds have been transplanted. But there still remains some question as to whether there is room left for many bison to wander free as they used to do. Ironically, the greatest free-ranging herd in the country are the hybrids of Wood Buffalo National Park, the descendants of the Pablo Allard purchase of 1907. They have survived because of the dedicated efforts over many years of people who just like buffalo.